Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I recently did a video talking about how I think one of the most forgotten baits this year has been your boot tail swim baits. And in that video, I was fishing this exact bait, which is a 4-inch Raid full swing, and I had it paired with a core tackle Tush jig head. And I got a lot of comments from people on that video specifically asking me about the tush. You know, they watched the video and I showed the video, and in the video, all you saw was the swim bait, but I talked about how I was using a 4/0 3/8 ounce swim bait hook. So when people saw it in the video, if they're not familiar with the tush, they don't realize that the weight of the hook is actually all internally into the swim jig. So when you thread it on, you've got the weight completely inside of the bait, just like that. I've got a bunch of them rigged right here. This is a Berkeley hollow belly. You can see probably kind of, if I pull it tight, maybe you can see the weight down the center of it. Here's a Kitech where I've got one rigged up. And then we've got like our little finesse tush size. So this is the little 2/0 finesse tush. So it comes in a bunch of different sizes. And you know, I think I always forget that there's a lot of people out there that are not familiar with my channel or with core tackle products. So when I do a video where I'm using a core tackle product like the tush, I get a lot of comments generally from people specifically asking me what hook that was. So in this case, for those of you that may have watched that video and are now watching this video, it was a 4/0 3/8 ounce core tackle tush swim bait hook. And tush stands for the ultimate swim bait hook. Now, as the designer of that bait, part owner of Core Tackle, I want to stress the fact that it was designed around using as a swim bait, a boot tail swim bait um, hook. So depending, no matter what the swim bait is, just from using it as a replacement to a traditional front weighted swim bait hook. And the reality is it works extremely well. As you saw in that video, I was catching fish with it. And really what happens, there's a lot of advantages. So when you've got a hook that is internally weighted, a couple of things that does. One, it gives the bait more side to side belly roll because the weight is closer to the tail. So when that tail rotates, it takes less energy to rotate the bait, because instead of that energy coming from the tail having to go all the way to the head, like on a traditional jig head, that energy translates better to the weight, which is closer to the tail. So you get much more increased side to side roll, which in my opinion is something that definitely triggers a lot of strikes. You know, we are finding with a lot of the baits we're using now, you want baits to rock a little bit. And I think a big part of that is when you've got a multicolored bait, you get some of that bait change when it rolls. And that's something that generates a instinctive reaction out of a bass to trigger them to strike. It's almost like they see that change in color, and that makes them think the bait fish is fleeing away, so they'll actually bite it at that point. So it's really good at generating reaction strikes. So, you know, one key is you get that side to side motion. Another is you can skip the bait extremely well because the weight is inside of the bait. So if you go back and watch that video, and I'll actually link it at the end of this, you can see, you know, I skipped that bait from a long, long ways away underneath the dock with no issue at all. I mean, I just fired it under there, and the tush skips so insanely well with your swim baits. It's ridiculous. So that's another thing I love. Another has to do just with your hook set. So, you know, if you're fishing a hollow belly like this, or again, any kind of boot tail swim bait, when you set the hook, you don't have to blow. I don't know if I have one. So like here's a traditional front weighted swim bait hook, right? If I set the hook, I have to blow that whole jig head through the fish's mouth. It's much easier to pull a more narrow profile of a swim bait than busting that bigger jig head through the fish's mouth. So in my opinion, you get better hookups. At the same time, because I now have the weight further back and closer to the penetration point, the fish cannot get nearly as much leverage to throw your hook when they come up and jump. So if I'm throwing a traditional hook and I've got that fish, hooked like that and that weight's hanging out, when they come up and jump, that weight just goes flying back and forth. And that little bit of leverage is what helps them throw the hook when they jump. With the tush, because the weight's further back, if you've got them hooked, you don't have nearly as much potential to get that bait generating the momentum to swing back and forth to free the hook from getting stuck in the fish's mouth. There's a ton of benefits, in my opinion, to using that tush versus your traditional front weighted swim bait hooks. But here's the key. So, a lot of people ask me specifically for that. One of the other things that I love about the tush, though, is it's a very, very versatile hook. One of my favorite ways to fish it is in tubes. This is a tiny little 2.5-inch tube. I've got our 2-aught. This is the standard 2-aught. This is a 1/4 ounce tush. We make the finesse tush, so if you want to use even a lighter wire hook, you can go ahead and do that. Just slides up inside and poke it through wherever you want it. Poke it through and you've got a tube hook that is really well. And because that weight is not all the way up at the head, it falls a little bit more slanted. You get increased spiraling motion by the tube. So that's one thing that I love to do. And then, with the straight tail minnow craze right now, if you watch Core Tackle's other owner, Johnny Schultz, one of his favorite pairings is on this guy. This is a Hog Farmer Spunk Shad. So he'll take that tush and thread it up inside of that, and he'll fish a straight tail minnow like the Hog Farmer Spunk Shad on the tush head, and he'll fish for those suspended fish using forward-facing sonar. So not only is it now just a swim bait jig head, or not only a replacement for a traditional front-weighted hook, you now can use that same jig head for tons of different applications, whereas you can't take this swim bait head and do that. So for those of you that were asking me about the hook that I was using, I highly recommend checking them out. Tackle Warehouse has them. They're one of our main suppliers. I'll put the link for the Core Tackle Tush head there. And if that's something that interests you guys, I highly recommend it. I absolutely love them. The Finesse Tush, we get a lot of questions on the Finesse Tush as to what's the difference. I'm just going to show you real quick. So all of the Finesse Tush jig heads are 2-aught hooks. And the 2-aught hooks are a lighter wire. There's still a light wire jig head, as you can see here. And just for comparison size, I keep dropping everything. This is also a 2-aught hook, but this is a standard jig hook versus a light wire jig hook. So you can see that length is the same, but from a size comparison, significantly smaller, significantly more light wire. This is a custom made hook that we have made for us. That, guys, it's the same hook that's used in the guppy head. It's just a 60-degree angle versus a 90-degree angle, which is what we prefer in our tush, is a 60 degrees. So from that standpoint, for those of you that ask about the Finesse Tush, you can see it's a much smaller hook. So if you're fishing some of your smaller, like 3.3 Kitex, I recommend the Finesse Tush versus the regular tush, which is better for some of your bigger, bulkier swim baits. Anyways, check them out. I will put the link for the Core Tackle Tush. Just a killer bait, in my opinion. One of my favorite ones. It's actually the bait that we first created for Core Tackle. And hopefully it helps answer some of the questions that I got from that previous video, which, again, I'll link at the end of this if you just want to watch that too. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate all the support. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow for you.